I think it's probably an old saying by this point. The easiest way to get a lot of attention very quickly in the entertainment world is to do another installment of something that everyone's familiar with already. This is a no-brainer, of course, because something old and ended that already had an established fan base who are nostalgic for it is easier to market than something new that has to build goodwill from the ground up. And in our currently depressing socio-political climate, it's only natural that production companies have been drawn to baiting audiences with nostalgic comfort food sitcoms that you don't have to use your brain for. There's different types of sitcom return, of course. You've got the fully fledged continuation of a show several decades later, like with the attempted restart of Roseanne before second restart and dumping of its title character, or you've got one-off specials like the 30 Rock reunion, which was principally and cynically used to market a new streaming service. And there was also, and this is the gold standard of sitcom returns, the Parks and Recreation special. They brought together all the cast members remotely, had them in character, and it was a properly scripted half-hour edition showing us what's happening in the characters' lives years later and how they would react to the coronavirus pandemic. It gave us a little glimpse into these characters' lives years after the show had ended. And the fact I kind of really wanted something similar from the long-awaited Friends reunion special is admittedly probably my fault. The Parks and Rec special was so good that it kind of set a precedent for me with this new wave of sitcom returns. Nothing could ever top that approach to me, and I kind of had the wind knocked out of my sails when I found out that the Friends reunion was going to be the 6 cast members basically just sort of show up together, unscripted and out of character. And also there are some unrelated celebrity guests who didn't have anything to do with the show who just sort of show up for no reason. I don't want to sound ungrateful, but I just really wanted something more out of this. Personally, I wanted to see what happened after Rachel decided to give up her dream and stay with a man who's done nothing but make her miserable for years in a finale that, yes, everyone went aww, but honestly, I just did not buy that ending whatsoever. Sure, everyone wanted Ross and Rachel to get back together in the end, but we spent 10 bloody years watching demonstration after demonstration of precisely why Ross and Rachel were bad for each other. I honestly believe that Rachel would start resenting Ross at least 2 years after that finale, let alone the almost 20 that it's been since Friends ended. Yeah, it's almost been 20 years since the finale aired. Does anyone else feel ancient yet? Maybe that's why they didn't do this in character, because I appear to be the only one who thinks that Rachel really shouldn't have got off that plane, and if I'm right, then coming back to them years later would probably just make everyone miserable. Although I would argue that that would be in keeping with the point of Friends, because no one seems to mention that the most interesting thing about the show is that it spends quite a lot of its time juxtaposing deep tragedy with an anachronistic sitcom framework.
I saw a psychiatrist at work today.
Why?
On account of my rage. Well, when the psychiatrist told me that I had to take a leave of absence because I yelled at my boss, so he offered me a tranquilizer. And I thought it was a good idea. So I took it.
Okay, yes, he's doing it in a funny way, but Ross just had an emotional breakdown at work and got put on medication. That's not a fun thing, you know. Phoebe's mother committed suicide and she grew up homeless. That is a deeply tragic backstory, but it gets laughs because it's delivered as a series of jokes.
I made a man with eyes of coal and a smile so bewitching. How was I supposed to know that my mum was dead in the kitchen?
This is the core of what I love so much about Friends. Everyone always makes a big deal of it being warm and fuzzy and nice, but it just appears to be warm and fuzzy and nice. The reason it coats itself in that glossy sheen is to make the difficult parts of life that everyone goes through, loss, tragedy, pain, rejection and heartbreak, easier to cope with. That's why people relate to it, and also why they find it comforting. Now, while the Friends reunion special isn't an in-universe episode, which alright probably wouldn't have worked because everyone's grown up and moved on by now, all of the characters had their endings and it's a closed book for reasons that they outline in it, but to its credit, about 45 minutes of it are a nice, quiet, humble look back at past glories. The only problem is the other half. It's part documentary and part variety show, and it contains quite a lot of filler that even I, as a big fan of Friends, was either struggling to pay attention to or was cringing so hard that I was vanishing into my sofa. The moments where this special really shines and makes up for them not doing an in-character reunion episode were just these little moments where it's literally just the 6 of them show up on the old sets, wander around, reminisce, and tell old stories. Someone will point out a detail that you didn't notice, like this beam was gone in the later seasons, and they explained that the reason they got rid of it was harder to shoot around. These sequences are just pure gold. It's just the bits in front of the audience are much, much less so. I really don't know why James Corden was picked to host this. Maybe it's because he was in a sitcom once, and Friends is also a sitcom. So, that's relevant. But his questions really don't add anything to the experience. It's much better just watching them tell unprompted anecdotes based on them exploring their old surroundings, rather than just watching them sitting uncomfortably grouped together on the sofa and watching James Corden force a joke exchange about how no one calls Matthew Perry anymore. Oh yeah, and Corden also lifted a joke from Knowing Me, Knowing You with Alan Partridge about how shooting an interview in front of a fountain doesn't work because it's too loud. There's just so much stuff in the Friends reunion that we just didn't need. The table reads where they recreate famous scenes are quite nice and fuzzy and warm, yes, but this is more time in the special that could have been spent on insight instead of being spent on something that doesn't really serve much of a purpose. Do you remember the one where Monica got stung by a jellyfish and got peed on? Yes, I do. Because I watched it. Like, I get the use of old clips when it comes to the sequences of them wandering around and telling stories. They show the clips relevant to the stories that they're telling, like the one where Matt LeBlanc dislocates his shoulder and they write that into the show. There, the clips provide context for what you're watching. But there's a difference between context and just flatly referencing stuff that, yes, I do remember, because I saw it. And yes, I agree, it was funny, but what does just recalling that particular episode add to the experience? It's like a clip show. There's tons more of these references and recreations, and James Corden just reading facts off cards and seeing if Aniston, Schwimmer, Perry and the rest of them remember certain facts about the show. And they make them all play guess the voice of the famous celebrity that we had on the show back in the day. Oh, it's Tom Selleck. He played Monica's old boyfriend Richard. Hi Tom Selleck. Isn't it amazing how you're on the reunion show? Okay, that's enough of you. Bye. Really, that's all they do with Tom Selleck. He's just sort of there for a second, his character is acknowledged, and then it's done with. I know people were disappointed that Paul Rudd wasn't on this, but even if he was, they'd probably just do the same thing. Hi Paul Rudd, you were on the show back in the day, weren't you? Yes, I was. Brilliant. Okay, that's enough of you. Bye. I sort of had to remember to jolt myself awake again whenever we cut back to the creators of the show talking about the background. You know, the bit that's interesting. How they came up with these characters, wrote them, and how they approached casting them. And honestly, they should have just had the 6 friends as talking head documentary style interview sequences, separately and together, because it's all relevant and it's all interesting to me as a fan of the show. I didn't know that Matthew Perry and Jennifer Aniston were both on other shows at the time they were being headhunted for Friends. It was interesting seeing clips of these other shows that they were on prior to being in Friends. Didn't know that. This gives me context. This is insightful. But that's when we run into the problem of the 2 separate purposes of the Friends reunion that kinda run counter to each other. One purpose is to expand on the background of a show that everyone loves, and the other is to celebrate the legacy of that show. And these are 2 very different objectives. One involves interviews and digging out offcuts and studio material and facts that we weren't aware of, and the other involves getting Lady Gaga to sing Smelly Cat, just to make the audience marvel at the novelty of getting someone who is now famous to sing a song from a sitcom that is also famous. I suppose this is part of the problem. The Friends reunion special was never going to be anything other than what it is, because Friends is, was and always has been far too famous for what it actually is. As I said earlier, I love the small, quiet and intimate moments where we see them go back to their old dressing rooms and talk about when they used to have lunch together. I love the humble, humanising element to all of this, and it works well because that reflects the spirit of the show. Friends was always small and intimate. You were watching some very personal moments in these people's lives, and you learnt very revealing information about them. It was a very small and tightly knit group of people who know everything about each other. The point of the show is that the viewer is almost treated like you're a part of this small group of friends. The personality of Friends, the show, always kind of ran counter to Friends, the global phenomenon. And while about half of the Friends reunion special is about that small, personal and intimate show, the other half is about Friends the global phenomenon, and it's ended up incredibly indulgent and bloated, and most of that is coming from the irrelevant celebrity guest stars, easily the worst of which was the fashion parade where they got Cara Delevingne, Cindy Crawford and Justin Bieber wearing all the Halloween costumes. Though the interview sequences with the big celebrity guests aren't much better, because aside from the people like Reese Witherspoon, who was actually on the show back in the day, the talking heads don't really offer much in the way of insights, because they can't. Because they weren't involved in the show at any point. They're just fans. That's literally all they've done here. They've just got people like David Beckham to just sit there and describe a scene and explain why that scene was funny. And that's when you realise that the reason these unrelated celebrity guests are there is not to say anything important. We're just meant to be impressed by the fact that they're a celebrity. Wow, David Beckham is a famous man, and he is talking about Friends, which is a show that he likes and that I also like. Oh my god, celebrities are so relatable. It's like we're one and the same. Like, I could have just watched a Friends Funniest Moments compilation on YouTube if that was what I wanted. Actually, that'd probably be more enjoyable, because when comparing listening to someone recount a funny moment from a thing they watched to actually watching the funny thing itself, I know which one I'm going to pick every single time. I just felt that indulging in the fans of the show to this extreme was out of kilter with the style of Friends as a show. And as said, this doesn't serve much of a purpose. Do you remember the one where Ross dressed up like an armadillo? Yes. Yes, I do. I can just go watch it if I want. Do you remember the one where Joey joins a sex cult? Did that happen? Was there an episode where Joey joined a sex cult? I mean, I assume there must have been, because they've just got Dua Lipa literally describing a scene in that episode, so... Yeah, I do remember the one where Joey joins a sex cult. Do you remember the one where Joey saws Ross's arm off? I'm pretty sure that didn't happen. No, it did! Look, Ryan Gosling remembers it. Oh, okay. Do you remember the one where Phoebe hijacks a plane and holds everyone hostage at gunpoint? Okay, I'm pretty sure you're just making these up now. No, I'm not. Look, here's Machine Gun Kelly talking about that particular episode. Oh, yes, I remember that episode now. Tell me about history, precious celebrities. I have so much to learn.